What's up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Total Human Optimization Podcast. We're in February now, and you know what that means? We're on the road to summer. We're all going to try to get in the best shape we can so we look good on the beach, look good at the pool, all those types of things. So we have a special guest on today, Laura Williams from girlsgonesporty.com. Welcome, Laura, to the show.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here.
We're so glad to have you. You've been doing some cool articles for us lately, huh?
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And I just heard a notification, so I'm going to make sure that I've got something else shut down so I don't get those. Sorry about that.
No problem. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you have a master's degree in this kind of stuff, and you also started your own site. So give us a little background of you and what you've done in your career and what you're doing now.
Sure. Well, it's kind of funny because I figured this question was coming. So I was thinking about it on my walk with my dogs this morning. And I've always been in the fitness space. It's been kind of what I've done forever. But at the same time, it hasn't been at all a straight line career for me. I was active growing up, played sports through high school, and going to college, I wasn't someone who knew what I wanted to do with my life, right?
Does anybody ever really know what they want to do with their life?
Other people in my family did. I don't understand it. But yeah, my brother is a doctor. He knew when he was 10, he wanted to be a doctor, and I was just not that way. So I knew I enjoyed fitness. I knew that coming off of being an athlete, growing up, you're used to having a coach and you're used to having a team, and you don't necessarily have to think about what that means for you on your own, and having to come up with your own workouts and staying motivated on your own and all those other things. So coming off of playing basketball through high school, I kind of didn't know what to do with myself, and I enjoyed being physically active, but I wasn't sure how to apply that myself. And then going to college, it was kind of like, well, I enjoy this, so why don't I take some classes? And so and then I did well in them. And I knew I was getting married right out of college, which I met my husband when I was 18. So
nice.
Yeah, it was just one of those things where we knew that was the next step. He was older than me. He was already done with school. And so I wanted to get through as quick as I could. So I was like, you know what? The fastest course to getting done with school is getting my exercise science degree, and then
most people try to stay in school as long as they can, so they don't have to have a real adult life.
I'm a weirdo. And so I said, okay, this will be the fastest way to get through. I got my exercise science degree and a minor in business, and still wasn't sure what I was exactly going to do with those things. So I ended up wanting to take a sales job at a gym, Lifetime Fitness in the Dallas area. They were just opening one. And I walked in for this sales interview, and the guy's looking at my resume, and he was like, I see that you were a lifeguard. We need an aquatics department head. Do you want to do that? And I was like, okay. And so that's kind of how I got into management. I went from aquatics supervisor there at that facility to being a parks and recreation supervisor for a city. And then I started managing at a gym. It was at the University of Mary Hardin-Baylor. I was hired as their aquatics and gym supervisor, coordinator, whatever you want to call it. And it was there I started creating relationships with some of the exercise science professors, and they really encouraged me to, why not sign up for a master's degree program here? You'll get half off, which was awesome. And so I ended up starting my master's degree there at UMHB while I was working. And it was life-changing for me because, my undergrad degree was just kind of like, I like this, I want to go through school, we'll see what happens. And when I started my master's degree program, those professors, they were so passionate about what they were teaching, and they did such a good job of it. It was impossible not to also get excited about the field. And I also had a mental shift there, kind of like really, really seeing the bigger picture, not just how fitness and health relates to me, but how it relates to other people. And, mid-20s, you're very much kind of figuring
Yeah, we're still figuring it out now.
everything. And so it was one of those things where it's like, it's not just about me, it's about, the bigger picture, and how these things apply to people from all walks of life, and how you can really help people tap into the psychological side of health and fitness, because that's a huge part. And also understanding, like, I grew up being active. Not everyone does. So, like, how is it for the person who is not active growing up? And how is it for the person who never ate well growing up? And how they're kind of overcoming some other issues? And how do you make fitness applicable or interesting for them? So then I went on. I didn't finish my master's degree. I'm sorry, this is taking way too long, but
it's cool. It's nice to have the little bio of Laura here.
I'm gonna power through. All right. So I went on. I was doing management for it was called the Salvation Army Croc Center in Oregon, and I was hired as the director of programs before they opened. And then, so it was this big, like, grand opening. You're hiring everyone. It was a 140 people department. And so there was a lot going on. And after a year and a half, I was completely burnt out, a lot of 80-hour weeks, like a lot of stress, and so I was like, you know what, I want to go back. I want to finish my master's degree. So finished my master's degree and was in the process, I had left my full-time career. In the process, I was like, I have to make money. I can't just, pay all this money for my master's program and not make anything. So I started freelance writing, and not really intending to make it my career, but 6 years later, here I am. I'm still freelance writing. And after I finished my master's degree, that's when I decided that I also wanted to create my own site, Girls Gone Sporty, with the whole intent of redefining what it means to be healthy and active. It's about tapping into that thing that isn't necessarily about looking a certain way or being a certain way, or thinking that sporty is just the athlete who's killing it every day in the gym. It can be a number of different things depending on where you are in your life. So yeah, that's a long story. Sorry.
No, well, I feel like I know you better. So, and I'm sure everybody else feels like they know you better. But that's great. I mean, anytime you can follow a path and end up somewhere you want to be, that's always a great thing. And you obviously with your site and in some of the work you're doing with us now with the articles on it Academy, you're helping people. And every time you're helping people, life's always a little bit better.
It is.
So some of the things we wanted to talk about today as we're getting ready for our road down to summer, there's all types of philosophies when it comes to diet. You see all types of different things. Now, the one, and I'm going to be fully candid here, I don't know much about it. And that's probably a good thing for our listeners. If there's anybody that doesn't quite have an education on this type of thing, they're going to have a person that's just unknowledgeable as they are on the subject. And just from the name, I already have a little problem with it because I love to eat. I want to eat all the time. But intermittent fasting. Okay, so this has been a thing for a while now. I'm sure everybody has their opinions.
Sure.
But give us the rundown a little bit. What is intermittent fasting, and I'm sure there's probably various forms and philosophies. Give us a little breakdown.
Yeah. So intermittent fasting is actually, I'm not someone who's big in diets. I just like fundamentally, I don't want anyone telling me what to do. I tend to rebel. So the intermittent fasting is really interesting to me. The concept is really interesting because it approaches the idea of calorie restriction a little bit differently than your typical diet. So a typical diet might say, you have to cut out X, Y, or Z foods, and you have to limit yourself to X, Y, or Z calorie intake per day based on your size or what your goals are, or your sex, whatever. So the idea of intermittent fasting isn't necessarily that you have to cut out specific foods or specific food groups or, limit your total calorie consumption. It's more about when you're eating and when you're not eating. So the idea of intermittent fasting is that you take a fast. So you don't eat for a certain period of time. It's done differently. There are whole day fasts where there are a couple different programs in how they approach it, but like a whole day fast would be 24 hours of not eating, and
No, not doing it.
or very limited eating. So you might say for that day, you know, you're keeping your calorie intake to, let's say, under 800 calories. I'm making something up here, so don't just take that example as word of God, people. But so you might have a low intake day for 24 hours, or you might have a no intake day for 24 hours. You could have an alternate day fast, which is exactly what it sounds like. So you take 24 hours off, 24 hours on. And then you have what I find the most interesting is the partial day fasting. So it's basically limiting yourself to an eating window. So during the day, usually the way it's set up is you go to bed at night, whatever time you go to bed, you know, let's say 10 p.m.
If you're lucky.
Exactly. You wake up at, I don't know, depending on the 6, 7, somewhere around there. Yeah. But then you don't, you know, the whole idea of breakfast is you're breaking the fast and you eat a meal early, relatively soon after you wake up. The idea of an intermittent fast, and that is a fast, that like sleeping is fundamentally an intermittent fast because you're not eating while you're sleeping. The idea of a partial day fast would be that you're extending the next eating period a little bit later. So you might say, well, if I go to bed at 10 and I wake up at 7, I'm still not going to eat my first meal until noon. So that might be a, what is that? 14 hour fast. And then say, you know, so, but then I can eat from noon until 8 and I'll have this 8-hour eating window. And during that 8-hour eating window, I'm not counting calories. I'm not necessarily cutting out food groups or saying I can or can't eat certain things. I'm just saying I eat between noon and 8. That's it. At 8, again, I'm going to stop eating and not going to eat again until noon.
So what is this doing to the body? I mean, if you're trying to build muscle, I imagine this is not the way to go.
Well, it kind of depends. So again, depends on your goals. And if there's like a crunching noise in the background, my dog's chewing on a bone.
He's not intermittent fasting. He's hungry now.
Yeah, exactly. So it depends. So the research on intermittent fasting is really interesting. And it all kind of started, there's actually a lot of research on fasting because of religious fasting. So you have Ramadan, and that in particular has been a point of interest, particularly for athletes that are Muslims who are practicing their religion and participating in Ramadan and aren't eating or drinking between sunrise and sunset on days that they're. That's
got to be tough.
Oh my gosh, I can't.
No way.
But people do it, right? Yeah. So it's a point of interest to researchers and has been for a long time. My parents happen to be Orthodox Christians, and so they go through different periods of fasting throughout the year. And it's not always whole food fasting, so you might not be off of food completely, but it's like you don't eat certain things at certain times of the year. And so there's been a lot of research on fasting as a whole in relation to religious practices and how that might or might not affect body chemistry. And then in terms of performance, it's only started to gain more traction in the last few years. But it's really interesting because across the board, most of the research is pretty positive when it comes to just changes in the body that take place as part of fasting. So when you eat, you're basically placing stress on your body. Just like when you exercise, you're placing stress on your body because the body then has to break down the foods that you're consuming. And there's a bit of an inflammatory response because of that. Okay. So when you take 24 hours or you take 18 hours or you take however long you elect to abstain from food, you're basically giving your body a little bit of a break from some of that inflammatory response.
At the same time, since we're not constantly feeding our bodies, are we jacking up our metabolism a little bit, possibly?
With fasting?
Yeah.
It kind of, depends. So it depends on how you're approaching your fast and your food consumption when you're not fasting, right? And this is where more research as a whole needs to be done. I tend to be a little bit wary about giving hard and fast rules, yes or no, black and white.
We want the answer.
When it comes to nutrition, because, I can get off on my high horse in a little bit about what research really tells us. But it kind of depends on how you approach your food consumption in relation to the fast. So if you say fast for 24 hours, and then you come back on and you're like, I'm going to eat all the food and I'm going to eat all the bad food because now I can. Yeah. And you're like,
why wouldn't you?
Well, exactly. I'm going to eat, a million donuts and a million, that could potentially screw up your metabolism. That could screw up your metabolism regardless of whether or not you're fasting. But fasting as a whole doesn't necessarily screw up your metabolism. We've been told for years that, the first thing you want to do when you wake up is eat breakfast. And then you want to make sure that you're eating, 5 to 6 small meals a day, eating every couple hours, and you're keeping your metabolism revving. And, there's the whole process of eating is a thermogenic effect. So your body has to use calories to break down the food and assimilate it into your body. But that's not necessarily traditionally the way things have been done. So if you look back on history, we haven't always had 3 meals a day with snacks in between.
Where did that even come from? Like, who decided in the beginning of time that you have breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Like, who came up with that?
Exactly. And who's to say when you, quote, break the fast with breakfast either? So, does it have to be first thing in the morning? Not necessarily, right? So it's more about the foods you're consuming as a whole. And if my dogs start fighting, I might be spraying them with water here in a second.
Don't get too violent now.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's more about the food you're eating as a whole, making sure that you're eating the right foods, so making sure that you're eating enough protein, that you're eating the right kinds of carbs, you're getting enough vitamins and minerals and micronutrients in the right percentages as a whole, rather than really being overly concerned about, well, I didn't eat this meal or I didn't eat that meal. I mean, the more research that comes out, and this is where,
I think the stress of thinking about it so much is probably the biggest detriment to people's health.
And I get it. Like, people want a yes, no. They want a right and wrong. They want black and white. Like, if I just follow these rules, the world's going to be okay, right? It's not that simple. And that's kind of where, when we talk about research and we talk about what it really tells us, like, research is just adding to the body of knowledge. So you can't necessarily say hard and fast that, this one study that came out is absolutely the end all rule of everything that we've ever learned about nutrition. So, like, if one study comes out and says, you have to eat breakfast first thing because the people who don't eat breakfast first thing tend to be overweight. Well, what is that really telling us? That's not necessarily the truth.
Yeah. And we don't know if they're training or not. Exactly. You don't know how much sleep they're getting, all these important other factors that
the types of stress they're living under, genetics. Why are they or aren't they eating breakfast? There are all sorts of reasons. And the more research that's come out and the more research that's been added to the total body of knowledge, so we look at these things like a big collage of little tiny pictures rather than one little tiny picture. It's basically telling us it's more about your approach to food. That's really the issue. How much are you eating over the course of the day?
So I'm gonna throw you a little curveball here. Ooh. So you mentioned that your husband's a doctor, correct?
My brother's a doctor.
Your brother's a doctor. Have you told him about the intermittent fast thing? What if you have, what is a doctor's opinion on it?
Well, I haven't told him about it, but he is an emergency medicine doctor. He was actually a Division I football player as well. And so he's always been active himself. He's always put a high priority on trying to eat well. But I think he would also be the first one to say that in medical school, they don't talk that much
Yeah.
about nutrition.
Yeah.
so,
I always feel like
so
I always feel
yeah.
like doctors and nutritionists are always kind of like fighting about different things. I don't know if that's just my personal opinion, but
I think everyone likes to fight about everything.
yeah.
Really. I mean, at the end of the day, like anyone who has an opinion on any subject matter, whether or not they have degrees or certifications, they like to fight
Yeah.
their fight their opinions.
Yeah. Well, everybody has an opinion.
Exactly.
So, I mean, when you're doing these type of things, I just like I don't know. I personally don't like the idea of like restricting stuff. It just makes things so hard. Um, when I mean, I guess it just depends on the person and your goals or whatever. But I don't know. I'm
No,
having a
I
tough
get it
time with
because
this.
I'm like I said, I don't like diets because I don't like anyone telling me
Yeah.
what I can or cannot eat. Um, the reason why intermittent fasting is more interesting to me is because some people, and again, this isn't everyone, some people might be more inclined to say, hey, well, if I can eat kind of my normal diet, if I can
Yeah.
eat the way I would normally eat for 8 hours a day, and then just not the other part of the day, that might be a little bit easier for some people, especially because food. I mean, the
Yeah.
reason why there's so many issues when it comes to food consumption and so many issues when it comes to nutrition is that food carries such a cultural importance and
Mhm.
a social importance, and um, in addition to just like it being fuel for movement, right? It kind of drives me crazy when people are like, well, food's just fuel, yes, but there's so much more to it than that. And there's the psychological side and the cultural and the social. And so asking someone to say, not eat their grandma's prized lasagna because it falls outside of whatever
Yeah.
plan, well, that just might not be reasonable for that person. But if you can say, hey, you can just make sure you
Yeah.
maintain your fast during the other hours,
Yeah.
it might
And
be a little bit easier for some people to swallow. So I think in terms of um, being another option
mhm.
for people to kind of say, well, maybe a normal diet's not working for me, but maybe this would. It's another option.
Yeah.
I guess is the
And
best way to put that.
and I've been kind of sensing, I don't know, it's just because it's here at On It, and this is the way a lot of the people think and our philosophy and kind of things. Is like I feel like a lot of people are starting to get away a little bit from like I have to eat only this many calories in a day and that's it. Because I mean, I've had some friends that that argue with me with diet and nutrition all the time, and like I'm eating 2,000 calories a day, and they're like, well, I'm not going to eat all day because tonight I'm going to go have a bacon cheeseburger and fries and beer. I'm like, it doesn't work like that. You
That is
can't do
not.
that. You're not getting any nutrition, you're not getting vitamins and
Yes.
everything out of it. So in a lot of the philosophies that that we kind of recommend here, and that has worked for a lot of people, is just eat whole delicious foods,
Yep.
you know often, throughout the day, and don't worry about your calories. I think Mike Dolce always says, don't count calories, make calories count.
Yep.
And of course there's going to be a degree, if you eat way too much food, you're going to gain weight, whatever.
Right.
But you're not, it's not bacon cheeseburgers. It's
Right.
like lean meats, lean proteins, and vegetables and stuff like
Right.
that.
No, and I completely I can't even tell you. I don't think I'm not that person who has ever or could ever count calories. That sounds like
It's too much
torture.
work. It's like making yourself a robot.
Yeah, and it's absolutely right. I think even in the article I wrote on intermittent fasting, like if you're going to try this, don't let it be, your excuse to just go crazy during the non-fasting periods. And that's the real problem with people who maybe skip breakfast, and why some of that research is out there already saying that, you do need to break the fast and have breakfast first thing because it proves X, Y, or Z. Or people who don't eat breakfast are heavier or consume more calories throughout the day or whatever. But I think it is kind of understanding, well, maybe the people who are skipping breakfast are, quote, saving calories
Mhm.
for the big
The
chow
big
down at
cheeseburger.
dinner,
Yeah.
like, so I think one of the things I said was definitely like, if you are going to try this, make sure that you're not someone, and this is a really important one, make sure that you're not someone who is prone to eating disorders or disordered eating. It's not a good path to take if you are either prone to that or might be inclined towards those things. Because if you give yourself the opportunity to make control be an issue regarding food, and that's what fasting is, it's having to exercise control over when to eat and when not to eat. If you start using it as a excuse to become obsessive, you can quickly spiral into an eating disorder that way. And so I would definitely say it's not for anyone who is prone to eating disorders or excessive disordered eating.
For sure.
It's also something that you need to keep training while doing it. That's actually, it came from the University of Maryland Baylor, one of the studies I was reading in the process of writing the article. They had 3 groups. They had a group that was doing intermittent fasting alone. They had a group that was doing strength training alone. And then they had a group that was doing both. And this is where you had asked earlier about, does it help with muscle building? Because logically, you'd think it wouldn't. And if I'm remembering correctly, I read several studies. So I'm pretty sure the way this one went was that, so you had the strength training only group, and they were training 4 days a week. You had the intermittent fasting only group, and so they were in intermittent fasting. And all of them, every single day, it was like an 8-hour window of eating window. So they weren't cutting out food for 24 hours. And then they had the combined group. So they were training 4 days a week, and they were intermittent fasting. It was the combined group, the training and intermittent fasting, that saw the most strength gains and the most body composition change. So they lost more body fat than the other 2 groups. The other 2 groups did the same across the board. They all saw improvements in body composition, but there weren't differences between the strength training only and the intermittent fasting only. So it's just kind of interesting. If you do it well, if you keep training while intermittent fasting and not seeing it as, oh, well, this is an excuse, I'm fasting, so I don't have to also train, you're going to see the best response by combining intermittent fasting with regular training. It's logical. Of course you would. Of course, you'd see better body composition changes and strength gains if you're doing both. But I think it's interesting that you didn't see more of strength gains in the strength training only compared to the combined group. So forget where I was going with that. I'm sure there was a reason I got off on this tangent. The different things to consider if you're going to try intermittent fasting. So don't be eating disordered. Make sure you keep training. Make sure you don't go overboard with food consumption. So don't use your eating periods.
So Orlando, don't eat a whole large pizza. It's not a good idea.
Not a whole large pizza. Not a crate full of Dunkin' Donuts or whatever it is. So.
You mentioned donuts in that. Is that your?
It's not. It's so weird. Like I never eat donuts. I don't even like donuts. It's so strange.
Oh, they're entering your mind somehow.
Apparently.
So another thing I kind of wanted to get into, we're talking about this whole thing, and we're talking about strength training, we're talking about building muscles and stuff like that. And it's always the biggest thing. And this is a question because I run on its social media. So this is a question I get all the time. It's like, should I take my protein before or after I work out? And of course we offer here at On It, we have our hemp protein. And then we also have our Dolce Whey, which is a great clean whey protein to have. But I mean, is there really rules? I mean, am I getting into that obsessive mindset when I was like, oh, I just finished my workout, I better have this protein within 30 minutes,
There are rules, but yes and no, right? So the most important thing over the course of a day is to make sure that you're consuming enough protein, period. End of story. Making sure it's high quality proteins, making sure that you're getting all the essential amino acids. So you're eating sources of complete proteins. That's really, really important. And then making sure you're dispersing it. So if you're eating proteins with every meal and you're eating high quality proteins with every meal, and you eat a meal like an hour before your workout, let's say, a nice pre-workout meal, and it's got protein in it, it's going to carry you through your workout just fine. And you probably don't have to obsess about like, well, I have to eat protein like immediately following, or I'm going to screw all my results.
Yeah,
Well,
so you wasted your time.
that's just fundamentally not true, right? You still like, it's not like as soon as you finish eating, all those amino acids that you just consumed are out of your body. No, they're hanging around there. They're getting assimilated. You're not just destroying, as long as you had a pre-workout meal within about an hour of your workout, as long as that happened, you don't have to like obsessively worry about where your post-workout protein is coming from, right? That said, you do want to make sure that you are consuming protein before and after within about a 4 to 5 hour period, which is where we get into the whole thing about anabolic window and you have to eat within a certain period of time. And there is truth to that, in that you do want to make sure that you're spacing out your protein meals about 4 to 5 hours between your workout. And if your workout lasts an hour to 2 hours, then you are kind of looking at, okay, I do need to consume another protein-based or protein mixed meal within about 2 hours of my workout. So you are kind of looking at that anabolic window. So there are rules. I think people get crazy. I mean, people get crazy about the subject. And I just, it was so interesting because right before this, I was kind of looking at some other articles, and I saw something that came out. It was a summary article about a study that had just been published. So it must have been August of last year. So 6 months ago, 8 months ago, somewhere like that. And it was saying that these days, some young men, particularly college-age men, are consuming supplements to such an extent that it could start becoming its own eating disorder.
Yeah, I can see that for sure.
Absolutely. But like, these are the people out there who are just so diehard, like, give me the answers, give me exactly what I need to consume, when I need to consume it. And if I can just say one thing, one thing, it's that supplements are there to supplement.
Yes.
Supplement. So like, you shouldn't be consuming supplements as your meals. Like that is just.
You're there with a plate and fork and a knife, cutting up your capsules and stuff like that.
That's crazy. This is crazy. People eat food. And then if you think you're not getting enough of something, or if you're super busy, like we've got people who are working 2 jobs and they're trying to train, and they have kids and whatever is going on in their lives, and they just don't have time to do a whole bunch of meal prep or think about like, how am I going to, eat something before and after when I'm running to get Johnny from soccer practice or whatever. Like if there's any reason why you just can't consume a food-based meal before or after, then absolutely grab a bar, shake up a shake, whatever you need to do to make that happen. So I think people get crazy on both sides of it, because you then have the Whole Foods people who are like, don't ever have supplements. And I'm like, you know what? Let's be realistic about these things. Like,
and I think, as on it goes, is like, we're probably one of the only companies that make supplements that will actually tell you that. It's like, before everything else, you have to start with a good diet.
Right.
Like
let's eat right.
That's the baseline. If you're going to take Alpha Brain and Shroom Tech Sport, but you're still eating donuts and drinking Coca-Cola, like you're not going to get anything out of it.
Right. Exactly.
It's when you have your good diet, your training, and you can just add these extra things to just, add a little bit more to the top of the peak of the mountain. It's just, that's what they're there for. It's in the name. It's called a supplement.
Yes.
It's in the name. That's what it is. But I don't know, like the whole protein thing has always just been a thing. Like, and I fall into it sometimes too.
Sure.
Like I'll go do a heavy lift and I'll feel all jacked and everything. I got to have that whey protein right away. Is how to, keep these muscles fueled and pumped up, but I mean, it's not hurting me. So like,
no, it's not. Yeah. I mean, I was talking to my dad a couple weeks ago, and he was like, yeah, I used to buy supplements until I realized I was just peeing money down the drain. And I was like, that is so true. Because if you're consuming, and then of course, yes, if you're consuming a good diet and you're looking for that extra edge, that extra little something, supplements are absolutely, that's what they're there for. But if you're, like you said, eating terribly and then just consuming a whole bunch of protein, like, I don't know, 900 grams or something a day, that's again, crazy. People get it together.
Somebody's eating 900 grams of protein.
I don't know. I just made that up.
Wow. Are they eating a Tyrannosaurus Rex for lunch?
There probably are people. I mean, truly, I wish I were kidding, but I'm probably not.
I'm sure they're out there. Well, I mean, it just seems like, all these different philosophies with intermittent fasting, when you should take your protein, whatever supplements, the whole thing is just, like you said, it's hard to give a clear-cut answer on the thing. And we will forever be talking about it, and
Oh,
we'll
forever.
forever be trying to figure things out. And at the end of the day, everybody's different, and you got to find what works for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another huge thing to stress. Like everyone and it's kind of I think in the whey protein article I wrote, I said there are protein wars afoot. Well, there's nutrition wars afoot. And it's one of those things where if something works for someone and they have this great anecdotal story, they can turn that one anecdotal story into like, this is the only way to do it. And if you're not doing this way, then you are fundamentally bad and wrong and a horrible human being. You see this all the time on social media. I'm sure you're aware.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, especially on social media, people come out of the woodwork to tell you all the ways
Everybody's
you're
an
doing
expert.
it. Exactly. Everyone else is doing it wrong. You have to do it like this. And everyone is fundamentally different. Like a couple months ago, I actually had a DNA profile done to see kind of how my body might be receptive to training or receptive to certain foods or whatever. And like it came back, you were absolutely not lactose intolerant. And I'm like, exactly. But then if we're talking about whey protein, some people are actually intolerant. It's not a good
have it.
solution. But
Yeah.
then you have them coming out saying no one should ever take whey protein. It screws with your, and it's like, that's just not true. Anyway, I'm again getting off on a tangent, but
so there's a bunch of different types. A lot of people don't know this. There's a bunch of different types of whey protein.
yeah, there are.
So run through that real quick for everybody.
Yeah, so whey protein, when you have milk, and let's say you have raw milk and you set a glass of raw milk on a table and you watch science do its work, like it will separate into whey and curds, so curds and whey.
So I can make my own whey protein at home by just leaving a glass of milk on the counter.
You can make sure it's raw milk. You don't want pasteurized milk. So yeah, you can actually separate curds and whey by yourself at home. Curds are where casein protein is found, and that's approximately 80% of the protein in milk, and then the other 20% is whey, and that's the liquidy part. And it's usually separated out when people are making cheese. And so then you have the whey that is then processed into the powders that we're so familiar with, dried and processed and packaged up. But there are different types of processing that are done to that. So you have concentrate, which is the least processed form of the protein, the whey. And it's about 70 to 80% protein. And it also it would be more prone to have more lactose in it. Any whey is going to be low on lactose because that's separated out largely when it's separated during curds and whey separation. But it might have more lactose in it. It will have more fat in it. It will have more some of the other nutrients that are found in milk will be in the concentrate form. Then you have isolate, which goes through further processing and it becomes more pure. So usually it's 90% or more protein. It usually has many fewer of those additives. It has much less fat in it. It has much less of the other nutrients found in milk. And then it's more likely to be beneficial for those who might be lactose intolerant. And then you have hydrolyzed, which they've basically taken the whey protein and they've kind of broken it down into amino acid groups, supposedly to make it more bioavailable. That's not necessarily true.
Okay.
Isolate and hydrolyzed whey proteins tend to cost more. So your concentrate version would be less expensive. It's got more additives in it. So it really kind of breaks down. It doesn't really matter which kind you use. You're going to have people who are like, that's wrong. You have to go with isolate or you have to go with concentrate. Of course, people are going to say these things. Ultimately, they're all very bioavailable. They're all, especially if you're consuming it post-workout, they're all going to feed your muscles the way they need to be fed and encourage protein synthesis. Synthesis. So at the end of the day, if you're consuming whey protein, you got to make those decisions on your own, which one you want to consume, but they're all going to basically function similarly in your body.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we've touched on a lot of different things today.
We have.
It was really fun. We're gonna have to have you back on again. And now that I know you're just down the road, we're doing this over Google Hangouts, but you're actually just down the road in Georgetown. We're in Austin. When you come in and say hello next time, and everybody, just keep going to the onit.com. Look, I forgot to show you my pizza. That's
nice.
That's how like serious I am.
I love pizza.
Everybody go to onit.com/academy. Laura's starting to do some awesome articles for us. The things we talked about today are on that site, and you can read a little bit more into them. And Laura, where can people follow you? Obviously, girlsgonesporty.com. What's your social media and all that?
Pretty much all my handles are Girls Gone Sporty. So I snapped those up real quick. So pretty much any social media you go to, just search Girls Gone Sporty and I'll pop up.
Awesome. Well, Laura, thanks so much. Thanks everybody for listening. We're going to try to keep these podcasts rolling. Until next time, later.
Bye.